Well, we will get started then.
Oh, see, I pay once a month. I bill pay
Good
because I like to just get it out of the way.
morning, everybody. I guess
morning.
I hit record maybe too soon, but thanks for coming out in the cold. It always seems kind of weird in April, especially after we had such nice weather to have snow and then the next morning. If you lovely people would like to join us, we're beginning. They're not
I moved to
even listening.
Colorado 21 years ago. I moved to Evergreen, and oh my gosh, it was like April 16th or something, and it snowed like almost 2 feet. It was like 20
yeah.
inches or something.
Yeah.
And we came from San Diego. I was literally catatonic. I didn't know anybody. This is before I met Anne. And I just like sat and looked out my window. I was like, rocking in my
We've
bed.
gone to
I had
hell.
3 little kids. I was like, and he was flying all the time. And he's like, I am really worried about you. And I literally was in a deep depression with snow and cold in April. And
It's just morally wrong. The universe is conspiring against us. Well, we got married on May 8th, and on April 30th, the year that we got married, huge blizzard. Well, it might have been the day before, but anyway, it was the week before our wedding. So, and we were getting married in this church camp chapel off of this little logging road.
Miles of logging road.
oh my God.
Yeah, and so all these trees had fallen on the road, so Ted and a bunch of guys had to go out like the week before with chainsaws to kind of clear the road.
Well, the camp people were out
This
there
was in,
too, 'cause they
yes,
were gonna
the
have
Black
a
Hills.
camp the week right after our wedding, and so we were all out there moving these logs and sawing things, and yeah, it was just crazy.
Okay, well, the recorder's been on for 5 minutes.
record that?
So,
Okay,
yeah,
edit that out.
it's all recorded. Yeah, we might have to. Yeah, I can edit. I can edit now. Okay, so we'll just start over and say, this is the beginning. So I put on so technically we're going to be talking about the sovereign today after we've been talking about lover and warrior for most of the year. And there's two, today and next month are the last two for this season. So I thought I probably should talk about sovereign, but then I started doing some writing because I'm trying to expand on the basic material that I started with 4 years ago around the soul, kind of listening to the soul and how to listen to the soul and how the soul speaks and, what is the soul and all that jazz. And so as I've been trying to expand on that material, I've been trying to figure out where things fit. And I've been kind of expanding some of my thinking about it. Plus, I realize it's really what I love to talk about the most. And so anyway, I just thought that I would bring you along in what I've been thinking lately, even though, I don't know, I can tend to get a little bit philosophical and then a little bit hair splitting when it comes to what is this and what is that and how does this relate to that and that kind of thing. And I'm not sure that it really makes all that much difference. But so I'll mention the sovereign a little bit, but I'm mostly going to talk about the soul, which I have always been sort of confused. Like, what's the difference? Like, what is there a difference? When we're talking about the sovereign, are we really talking about the soul, or what? And so that was kind of the question I ran into while I was reading. And in particular, as I was thinking about it all, I started reading some of my favorite people, of course. And so many people write about the soul and do it in the most beautiful kinds of ways that sometimes it's better heard that way than kind of directly looked at and put under a microscope, which always then brings me back to the whole idea of what is it that I'm actually doing here? Is this is this a fool's errand? Am I trying to talk about things that you can't really talk about without screwing it up, you know? But really, I think that you can, as long as you're really careful, and as long as you get that we're only, the words we use and the concepts that we have, we're trying to understand something vastly bigger than ourselves, and things that are mysteries, that have been mysteries ever since the beginning of the human race. And so we're doing it so that we can better get ourselves out of the way, so we can put ourselves into a better listening place. You know what I'm saying? So I think that in a lot of ways our culture gets in the way of us understanding what's most important for our own well-being and for our own, you know, our own souls. And that gets in the way, so we get confused, and we're trying so hard, but we're like banging our head against the wall because there are certain things that if we understood them, then we could shift what we're listening to and what we're paying attention to and what's actually going on inside of us, only we're not taught to pay attention to that. So I guess that just helps me feel better about what we're actually doing here and why. So anyway, so this is by John O'Donohue. It's a blessing for the unknown self. He says, so much of what delights and troubles you happens on a surface you take for ground. Your mind thinks your life alone. Your eyes consider air your nearest neighbor, yet it seems that, a little below your heart, there houses in you an unknown self, who prefers the patterns of the dark and is not persuaded by the eye's affection or caught by the flash of thought. It is a self that enjoys contemplative patience with all your unfolding expression, is never drawn to break into light, though you entangle yourself in unworthiness and misjudge what you do and who you are. It presides within like an evening freedom that will often see you enchanted by twilight. Without ever recognizing the falling night, it resembles the under-earth of your visible life. All you do and say and think is fostered deep in its opaque and prevenient clay. It dwells in a strange yet rhythmic ease that is not ruffled by disappointment. It presides in a deeper current of time, free from the force of cause and sequence that otherwise shapes your life. Were it to break forth into day, its dark light might quench your mind, for it knows how your primeval heart sisters every cell of your life to all your known mind would avoid. Thus it knows to dwell in you gently, offering you only discreet glimpses of how you construct your life. At times it will lead you strangely, magnetized by some resonance that ambushes your vigilance. Have you stopped listening now? Like, is it okay? Sometimes when I read poetry, I'm like, what? It works most resolutely at night as the poet who draws your dreams, creating for you many secret doors decorated with pictures of your hunger. It has the dignity of the angelic that knows you to your roots, always awaiting your deeper befriending, to take you beyond the threshold of want, where all your diverse strainings can come to wholesome ease. I mean, that's the whole book right there in one, basically, just the idea that so just to summarize what he's saying is that we live on the surface, and we take that for all there is, and we struggle here, but underneath everything there is a soul that would rather stay in the dark, and that just seems really inconvenient to me. Like, why stay in the dark if you know we're struggling, which is the same, another stanza that he had. It's like that soul will sort of stay hidden or stay in the dark, even though our soul knows we're struggling, we're suffering, we're screwing it up. We'll usually try to stay in the dark. And that's always a big question, like, why? the other thing that I like about it is this idea that it dwells in a strange yet rhythmic ease and is not ruffled by disappointment. So this idea that our soul really is not troubled, is not damaged or broken, or you can't actually kill it or, damage it in a way that that we sometimes feel it can, because when we're hurt to the core, we really feel like we're damaged sometimes. But the idea that the soul is still there and lives at ease and lives with a contentment that can't be ruffled. But here's the part that stumped me and really helped me to kind of understand how the sovereign and how the soul relate to each other, or what it contrasts to each other. And it took me a long time to figure this out. He says, so basically, the soul dwells in a rhythmic ease. It's not ruffled by disappointment. It presides in a deeper current of time, and it's free from the force of cause and sequence that otherwise shapes our lives. So then he says, were it to break forth into day, its dark light might quench your mind, which is dark light. This is in poetry words. For it knows how your primeval heart sisters every cell of your life to all your known mind would avoid. That made me want to bang my head against the wall, and I needed some help understanding what that means. But basically it's saying, I think what he's saying is, and it illuminated my own kind of greater understanding of the soul, is that it's so big and so much of it is so inexpressible that to break forth into light, we'd kind of just collapse. And then he talks about the heart, your primeval heart, sisters every cell of your life to all your known mind would avoid. In other words, your heart kind of holds on to even more than your mind doesn't understand. So all of these things like our unconscious drives and our the deeper kind of motivations that don't ever see the light of day, and then the woundedness and all the feelings that we have that we can't hold in our consciousness all the time. That's also in our unconscious or subconscious or whatever. So the mind can only take so much, is basically what he's saying. And so not only can the mind not even handle parts of itself, which basically the unconscious and memories and trauma and triggers and all of those things that exist within our brain and our mind would overwhelm our mind. But then there's the soul, which is so much deeper and bigger. And so I got to thinking about that and trying to figure out why, like what about all of that? And I had this I realized that I had oversimplified, I guess. Because when we talked about this before, I contrasted really the soul with the ego. And I think when I've done some teaching on the Enneagram, they talk about the essence and versus the personality or something. So as if, and other language that I've used in the past is the true self versus the false self. And pit those two things kind of against each other. Like our goal is to be the true self or to live from our soul and renounce the ego kind of thing, as if those two things are over and against themselves. But when I was thinking about the idea that the soul is really bigger than we could ever imagine, I started thinking about how an analogy would be like there are ideas and thoughts and meaning, right? But in order to touch those things, we have to codify them. There are truths. So in the whole bigger world of truth, there's truth that exists, that's real maybe, but in order to apprehend it, we have to kind of bring it into thought, and then which interacts with our brain, and then we can hardly have thought without words, right? So then we have words that are trying to represent thoughts, that are trying to represent meaning, that's trying to connect to truth. Do you get how that goes? And then so then we have words, and then words are comprised of letters so that we can read them. So letters are just basically little symbols that stand for sounds that work together to stand for words, which work together to make thoughts, which work together to express ideas, and and then there might be some truth out there. So if you think about that, there are these universal things out there that are bigger than the words and thoughts, but they have to become words and thoughts in order for us to apprehend them. It's kind of the same way with the soul. So there's something there, and well, here, I guess I should say, inside of us that is so inexpressible, so much more than what we reduce it down to. But we have to kind of reduce it down somehow, otherwise we'd be these big blobs of meaning that have no ability to connect with each other, right? So, so that's how I got to. So if the soul is this big, and probably infinite in some ways, I don't even know. I don't know what to say it, but this is just a diagram. If it's this big, and and then we're kind of, this is who we are, but in order to help us to express that or relate to that, we have to have some part of us that can interact with the outside world. And so I just think, oh my God, the way my mind works. So we have this soul, but the soul can't just show up and be raw with everybody. So we learn to interact with the world and with each other, and we're growing and this is what I'm now calling the ego. And I think that's how I'm going to define the ego, not as some bad thing or some pejorative term, but basically just like the way that we interact with the world, and it's absolutely necessary. And so inside the ego, we have all kinds of things, but I think we have these 4 quadrants. All of that is what I'm trying to tell you. We have thinking, doing, being, and feeling. And the words we've been using for that in order to kind of magnify them and illustrate them are sovereign, warrior, lover, and magician. So I'm now kind of thinking that sovereign is the part of the ego that holds some of these bigger ideas as much as we can stand, So it gets that we have a larger purpose. It gets that it's connected to an ability to and has an ability to touch maybe these larger things about the soul and about who we truly are. And so it's like the words, if you will, to the thoughts, to the back and back. And so that's my current thinking on it, because I never could quite understand. When we talk about the sovereign, part of us that knows who we are, that has a deeper wisdom that's connected to a larger truth, that kind of holds this sense of identity and all of that, I just think, well, how is that different than the soul? It is not in however it, can connect or is aware of or is able to do what it's supposed to do, which is touch the parts of the soul that are ready to be revealed or that are moving. So basically, then in this model, our mind is really part of magician, but it's also part of the whole. But the mind can only do so much, right? It can only, and it's kind of overwhelming just being what it is and doing what it's designed for. And so it serves us well. It's just inadequate for some things. And and touching these deeper, bigger ideas, it sometimes falls short. And if some of these other things are shrunken or out of control or out of balance in some way, I think that, at least in my life and in a lot of our lives, we try to overuse the magician for everything. And so then that works until it doesn't work, because it starts to warp things. And in its effort to understand and control things, your mind starts to warp truths and it messes you over. So in the developing person then, I kind of think, we come into the world almost like a seed, a baby. Babies are just magical, don't you think? They're just like pure essence and pure, maybe they're pure soul. I don't know, but it has to develop. But to the extent that the child gets what it needs, then it's safer to be who it is, right? So if the baby, the infant, the child has conditions that are wholesome and healthy and conducive, then the ego that it has to of necessity develop reflects pretty well who the child really is, I would think, theoretically, right? It's sort of like if you plant a daisy, it's a daisy seed, right? You put it in the earth, and if it gets the right kind of conditions, then it will be what it was designed to be. And it could be wonderful, beautiful. It's not going to be anything else. Right. It's just going to be what it is. Maybe a daisy's a bad example. But there are lots of different crops that don't grow. If they don't get what they need, they don't thrive. Or they get twisted, or they get deformed in a lot of ways because they get eaten by bugs, or they don't get enough water, or there's not enough sunshine, those kinds of things. So then the plant is deformed in some way. And so there's a distance between what it was supposed to look like and what it actually looks like. So in this way, human beings are kind of like that too. I think that if we, in a perfect world, if we had everything that we supposedly needed, I don't even know if that's true, but including adversity, like we need that too, but we would naturally be as close to our true self in our public self. It would be better, I think. But because a lot of us just don't have that, this part of us is always trying to figure out how to survive, how to live, how to blend in, how to succeed, all these things. So it starts to fashion itself according to what's out here. So we have let's just call it culture. And over here we have the soul. And so as this is trying to become something, it looks outside of itself. We look outside of ourselves, and then the values, the ideas, the truths, so to speak, that are around us, we get shaped by this. And if inside it's a little dangerous, then the distance between and the reflection of our true self, I think, the disparity increases, so that a lot of us find ourselves in adulthood, the souls that made it to adulthood and beyond are hidden from the self that we put out to the world. And then this begins to be a problem, right? You with me so far? I haven't put these things into words. That's why I'm laughing from time to time. It just feels like, I don't know, squeezing toothpaste out of a tube or something. An answer to what? To what? So, any questions or comments or,
I just had an question. In the piece that you read, all of those quadrant archetypes were present.
I know,
I
right?
just thought that was fascinating.
I know. That's why sometimes I just like
The lover,
leave it to the
magician,
artists.
body,
Yeah, the body.
We're
Yeah,
all there.
yeah. And how dense that truth is, you know, and that's the thing about poetry is that, yeah, it's just very condensed. All these really powerful truths in these very sparse words. And you can, I don't even know how many words there were, but not very many. 400, 200 words maybe, and just holding all of this meaning. And that's just poetry. And then you can look at art, and the same sort of things could be being communicated to you, but you don't have the words, you know, but it reflects something that's so powerful and so true that the best we can do is resonate at some level. And then all we know is that that's a funny feeling, or gee, I really like the pretty pictures, you know. You know?
Someone says, "Why do you like it?"
Yeah.
And you all of a sudden have to start going over that barrier and getting into the magician and saying, "Oh, I got to make it sound not crazy." So you go to the culture.
Exactly.
When really, you just want to like it.
Yeah. Well, well, and so I have a friend that's an art historian. So I just think about the whole field of art appreciation and art history and people who are explaining art. And sometimes I just laugh because that's exactly what that is. They're taking something incredible and they're squeezing it down into concepts we can understand, and they're endlessly explaining it, which is nice, I think. You can certainly, but think about, anyway, you can certainly appreciate that, and I think it helps us to appreciate these bigger truths. But now think about religion. So talk about huge things trying to get like squished down into transferable concepts, as we used to say in Campus Crusade. We can just, that's what they were trying to do, you know, trying to distill down these universal truths and then turn them into transferable concepts or 4 spiritual laws, and then there's, you know, if you were a child of the 70s and 80s, there was the Institute of Basic Youth Conflicts, which was nothing more than 150 lists of things. You know, 5 steps to a better, you know, this, 10 principles to being this or that, you know, just magicianing the shit out of these big universal truths. But anyway, which is what we're doing here. I'm just saying, I'm just admitting it. But I think that if we try to keep that over our shoulder and realize we're really trying to serve something larger, and for the purpose, for what purpose? So why do we even do it? You know, why do we even try to understand these things? Anybody want to take a stab at that question? Because I think that we do it because this doesn't work. Something broke down. This doesn't really work unless you're really good at it. So today, what I wanted to do is go back to one of the first teachings that I did around the soul, and one piece of it, which is the soul is countercultural. Like, if we know certain things about the soul, then we can start to put our attention toward it and cooperate with what it's trying to do. Because I think that the soul isn't just sitting there. It wants expression. It has a purpose, and it's there to be expressed. Let's put it that way. And as we're growing, it's trying to move us toward wholeness. I think it's always trying to bring the parts of us together into some whole that resembles the self that we magnificently could be. And so it's always in there. But if we don't really know what's happening, then we can spend our time spinning around. And so it's nice to know that there are some things about the soul that when the soul's trying to get your attention, you kind of know where it's coming from. Okay? Okay.
I had this thought when I see the diagram. I wonder, I'm not saying it's right, but image came to my mind of an iceberg.
Uh-huh.
And that kind of like that part is this piece of like, you know, it's
above the water.
Yeah, and then there's this whole mass underneath.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then a little piece is continuing to kind of move that up and or acknowledge it's even there.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think it's that's a good picture.
Yeah, this ego melts.
Oh, we could do all kinds of things.
Climate
And
change.
it comprehends the soul, right? That's the ego. It's become water.
Like, and I guess part of it is that the soul continues to, I guess, try to make its presence known, or,
Uh-huh.
and I think there's something also in that ego place that also senses there's something more, there's something
yeah.
else, there's, you know, this is something, but it's not the thing, it's not all, and so I think it's both sides
Yeah.
recognizing
Definitely.
that there's something to expand, erase, expose, acknowledge.
Yeah, and that's why I think it really helped me to kind of get out of that dualistic thinking about the ego versus the soul, because really,
It's an and.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so as we're moving toward wholeness, then some of the ways that we have warped ourselves into behaving in the world, they feel hollow and wrong and bad, right? Because they're not working. Or else we're trying to achieve certain things because we lost contact with the values of the soul, and so we're trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing, and we're looking to our culture for what we're supposed to be doing, and those values tend to be not sustainable or only available to a few people, and then once those people attain those things, is that bringing them the kind of fulfillment that was promised when they started after them? You know what I'm saying? So anyway, this is going to be a whole chapter. The soul is countercultural, because we were talking about the soul. The soul exists. The soul is subterranean, and the soul is countercultural. So that's where we are here. So we've done this before, and this isn't quite so hard, but I want to talk about the soul's relationship to certain things and contrast it to the culture's relationship with certain things. Because for a long time, so I made lots and lots of lists of things, and then I thought, yeah, but beauty could be something else, and so it's really how the soul relates to certain things versus how the culture relates to certain things. So, yeah.
I was thinking about the people that give the tours at the art museum.
Uh-huh.
They're like translators.
Yeah.
Or guides, and some are better than others. You know, some recognize that it's a mystery, and you're trying to put language to something, and they become guides in a helpful translation
Yes.
to tools.
Yeah.
And others are those analysts that, like, years ago there was an image of to count the rings on a tree, you have to kill the tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so some are the purveyors of death, basically,
Yeah.
to the art because
Yeah.
of that life-taking analytical piece. And so, anyway, just choose your guides carefully.
Yeah, right, yeah. And just realize that whatever, and I think too that we're so drawn, we so want to understand these things,
Yeah.
that we're so drawn to people who will explain them to us.
Yeah, there are good translations and not so good
Mm-hmm.
translations.
And we don't sometimes know the difference.
Right.
And so then we adhere ourselves to this particular, version of the translation, and then we can only go so far with that. So I personally believe that the purpose of religion is to kind of help us remember these things and help us attach to these bigger things and the parts of ourselves that resonate with them. And so that's hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to understand. And you have to hold people's attention. So you can't be always talking about the mystery. You know, you can't be giving them things to do that irritate them, like sit in silence for 20 minutes, you know, or serve the poor, for God's sake, you know, things like that. So we don't, that's where some of those things, you know, conflict.
Well, and maybe it's also, there's a time and a place for some of those types of translations that kind of set a foundation and give you something to work with, but it's not all that there is, you know.
Yeah.
It's a start, and it's all you can kind of connect to in the early stages, but recognizing that there's more, and being aware of it. I keep going back to the numbers analogy, you know, when you teach kids to count, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I mean, it's not that that's all the numbers that there are.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
There's more numbers than that, but let's just get there, you know.
Yeah.
And it eventually gets to more, and then it gets to numbers in between the numbers, and numbers before 0, and imaginary numbers. But we don't start there.
Yeah,
You know,
right,
also.
right, yeah.
So I think there's a little bit of that, and I think our challenge is recognizing that just because you start out with something very defined and crisp doesn't mean that that's all that there is.
Yeah, yeah. And we kind of want to just park. We don't like this idea of continually being challenged to grow and expand and adapt. We don't, it goes against our nature to control and contain and you know, sit on top of things and just be okay. And so we resist these things because and they're kind of hard. They're hard concepts and they're hard choices. And so we'd rather just justify what we're doing here and then build up walls and park it and call it something and then collect the masses. So anyway, so I was thinking in terms of, well, when I first started thinking about what are the values of the soul, I was thinking about things like, well, let's see. I obviously didn't think it all the way through, but I was thinking in terms of goodness and wholesomeness and beauty and truth, and maybe you can help me with some of these things that seem very like soulful values.
It's almost hard to put in words.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of a sudden we're going out of it.
Yeah, so I'll just put down some of those things. Beauty and goodness, which is hard to even define, but there is such a thing as goodness.
You said wholeness.
Wholeness, yeah. Wholeness and wholesomeness, which is kind of more like purity or something, you know. Yeah, connection.
Kindness.
Yep. Kindness.
Serenity.
Yep.
Comfort.
Yeah. Comfort. Peace. Yeah, strength. Mm-hmm. Courage also. So we have beauty, wholeness, goodness, connection, serenity, kindness, comfort, peace, strength, courage. And then, of course, when I was thinking about all of these things, I remembered one of the Bible verses, of course, that I had memorized from my Campus Crusade days, which is the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. That's what they're trying to communicate, that there is a realm in which these things are valuable, and they're not just concepts. They're like they're almost like substances. Like when you touch kindness, when you receive kindness, or when you give kindness, it's almost like a substance that moves through you that you can perceive in ways. You're not just saying, oh, well, I'm going to now commit an act of kindness because that is a good thing. It's not even there. And if you're receiving kindness, it's something that feels really nourishing. It's almost like that is a substance or has some kind of heft to it. So in contrast then, or just think about the kingdom of this world, if you will, the culture that we live in, what kinds of values, or what does our culture seem to run on? What does it seem? Yeah. Yep.
Speed, knowledge, power. So painful when you see the contrast.
Yeah.
It just hurts.
Image, success, power, knowledge. Yeah. Pride. Rank, which is also part of power.
Like on the soul, to me, it's like a deep integrated strength, and on culture, it's like a perceived strength.
Okay.
Maybe.
Or dominance.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could sit here all day and do this. Yeah, control. In fragments, but then I started thinking about yeah.
Yeah.
Like whatever we inflated.
Yeah, inflated ego, out of control ego. Some personalities might come to mind that are that really seem to that seem to kind of be icons for the worst of our culture, you know, the ickiest, grossest, most profane, like shallowest.
Grabbing.
Yeah, clutching, grabbing, disregarding, you know, so all kinds of things. Celebrity, I just, some of the things I think are typically American are power, but wealth and a certain kind of image and beauty. Celebrity is huge, and it's frighteningly more so as the days go by. We just cannot help but worship famous people. And we think that if we do something good, it's going to make us famous, right? I mean, success, our ideas of success are different. So then I thought we can make these lists all day long and then get lost in all of them. But that's when I started thinking about relationships to certain concepts that might be helpful. So when we're talking about success actually, everybody values some kind of success. It's just how you look at success and how you interact with success that maybe makes the difference here. And is important to understand when you're trying to listen for the soul and live your life more in accordance with it. So I often will see people that are at crossroads in their lives, and in transition or in crisis or in some sort of breakdown. And lots of times it's just you need a few repairs so you can go on, but increasingly, and this is where I love to work, which is in this people at crossroads at a deeper level, like at a identity crisis or at a kind of a developmental crisis in their lives. And this is where I started thinking about what's going on here. Because my belief is that when we come into these kinds of crises, it's usually, all things being equal, it's usually that the way you were living your life driven by the best ego you could put together started breaking down at some point, because it's ultimately not sustainable. If it's attached to a culture that values all these kinds of things that are shallow and just not terribly satisfying, then it's just bound to break down somehow. Plus, if you've focused your whole identity on a set of values that aren't resonating deeply with your soul, you're going to start feeling this inner conflict, this problem, like something's wrong. And what am I doing wrong here? So that was definitely my journey, and a lot of other people's journey who come in, they're like, my life just isn't working. I thought I would be this and this and this, but I'm not, and I'm failing, or I'm trying. Even people who've been in the self-help movement for recovery movement for decades, you know, they're trying so hard to be better people, but it's exhausting and it's not working, and we're breaking down. So I like to interpret this whole crisis and breakdown thing in terms of your soul has actually been inviting you into a different way to live your life. It's asking for more integration. It's asking for more emergence. And as the soul is moving you toward the old unsustainable ways are breaking down, which they naturally would do anyway, unless you were at the top of your game on everything. And then you might still feel this conflict in yourself. And so then, well, people usually come to me because they're not successful. They don't feel successful, whatever they define that to be. Like, what I was trying to do is not working, and I don't know what to do anymore. So you could define that as, I'm not successful. So their first conflict is their relationship with success. And so when we start then to take that template to look at their lives, if the soul is actually operating and inviting and moving, and the ego is starting to break down, then being in breakdown or being in crisis is actually what? Success. Congratulations. You're right in it. Like, you're doing it right. Something's working because your process is doing what it was designed to do. So that's like step one. We're not failing, we're succeeding. And then we start to figure out, what was it you were running after? And was that really satisfying? Or what was it really reflective of who you really are? Or were you trying to be something that you actually aren't? You know, is your life consistent with this seed of your soul that was, you know, planted in your body? And that's also a place of crisis, because you can only try to be something you're not for so long. And then you either have to keep propping it up by artificial means, or it will collapse. And so then success sometimes means destruction, deconstruction, confusion, not knowing, not controlling something. And so if you don't know that the soul defines success differently than our culture does, then you can despair. And a lot of people do, because they don't get it. They just know that they weren't pretty enough, or smart enough, or successful enough, or lucky enough, or connected enough, or whatever those things are. And so they don't count. They got kicked out of the culture, or they dropped out or something. So these things create so much pain in our heart, in our ego, that hi. Yeah. She'll fix you up.
Energy with which a person meets that crisis.
Mm-hmm.
What came to my mind when you said, you know, the culture has kicked me out, I'm not pretty enough. The energy can either go toward doubling down and being like angrily countercultural.
Mm-hmm.
So fine, I'm gonna like do all of these extreme things to fly in the face of the cultural norms.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think that energy of either doubling down and continuing the fight, or the opening to the collapse, to something new,
Mm-hmm.
to redefine the collapse, is obviously the camp that I favor. But it's just really interesting that energies underneath
Yeah.
that activity,
Yeah.
and what different directions they end up
Yeah.
fueling.
Yeah.
An opening energy
Opening
versus a
versus-
clutching energy. Is that,
or
a
in
fire.
technical terms, we call that the big fuck you energy. I'm going to create a different ego in opposition to you. Yeah. So I can be successful at giving you the finger, and you feel that energy of that sense of power by creating another false existence, basically. And
Is there a continuum where that part comes first because it's just how you say that, and then you move to a better?
yeah, I think it could be. I don't know that there's even one path or one way for everybody, but I do know that it certainly
I
was.
just wonder if the gross energy comes first.
Well, it certainly did for me. In one of my big transitions was in the realm of faith and in the church. Like I had thrown myself into it for 35 or more years, and really had it defined my existence. It was connected to everything that I loved and everything I thought was real and holy and true. And as I was moving through that, and I didn't understand some of these deeper concepts, I guess. And I started being more and more disappointed and heartbroken with what it had become, that I just got angry. All my striving, all my exhaustion and all my idealism just flipped to the other thing.
I find myself resonating with both
Yeah.
aspects
Oh, absolutely.
of knowing
given
intrinsically
day.
that that is not sustainable to continue flipping off every.
But you have to sometimes,
everything.
yeah.
But I'm not really an F sayer, but I cannot tell you how many times in recent months that is what I want to say the very most about everything.
Yeah.
And I know it's not sustainable. I know there's a better way.
Yeah. But you can't go there too soon. Yeah, if you try to go there too soon, like if that's there and that arises in you and you try to circumvent it, then it's just another spiritual bypass. So yeah, it's very much can be part of the process. Doesn't have to be. Kind of depends on what your makeup is. But that's why I love the word fuck, because it's so wrong. It's so bad. It's so offensive. It's so vulgar that it goes against all of our sensibilities. And so then to have the chutzpah to utter it out loud, when you're not supposed to, that sense of defiance, it carries that energy, that really, strong sort of rejection energy or whatever it is. And often that's really necessary. And of course, you don't have to say the word, but to find something that adequately facilitates the expulsion of that, or the expression of that particular thing, I think is good. So yeah. And you can't really dictate to anybody what's the right path, because then you're getting it off of listening to your own soul, what you really need, and listening to some self-help guru who's trying to tell you step by step, this is what you need to do. And a lot of those end up being helpful, but some of them just sort of help you skip stages that you will have to ultimately go back to,
I wonder, in your other diagram where you have the ego and the soul, and this idea that the soul is wanting to move towards, and the ego's trying to move toward. The soul's trying to be heard. The ego's recognizing there's something more. It's not an or. It's an and. And in this space of something breaking down, I wonder if it's really the ego wanting to connect more with soul than culture.
Yeah.
And the ego's going, I don't know how to break this barrier
Mm-hmm.
and connect over here.
Yeah.
And that's that angst that is starting to come forward. Is that?
Yeah, you've just described my whole adult existence and the reason why I became a psychotherapist. because I think the soul always trying to pull me, but I'm doing my best to understand.
And I just
Yeah.
don't know. And I have all this that I have to
Mm-hmm.
deconstruct or disconnect from, or
Live with.
Or live with and accept or something.
Yeah, align more with what's happening on my soul side as opposed to what's, I don't know.
Yeah, it breaks. It's hard to describe, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, when
yeah.
you get so far and then you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, if we see that the ego is trying to do the best for your soul that it possibly can, and this defensive posture, you know, like if it's an unsafe environment, then the ego is always trying to, you know, protect something, and always trying by distancing itself from itself. And that's how we got this whole idea of the wounded child and all of that. Like the ego can be hurt. Like parts of us definitely can be hurt and damaged, but ultimately, that's not your soul. It feels like the core of who we are, but that's only if we don't understand that there's an indestructible part of ourselves that no one taught us that. We don't have that. No one really knows what to do with that. So we just are left to our own devices on this surface life, doing the best we can to heal and grow and adapt. So we do it in these brilliant ways. You know, we have these self-protective devices. We have these ways of explaining things. We have these ways of hiding in plain sight and compensating and, you know, willpower. Yeah. Even the inner critic we bring online in order to keep, the inner critic gets attached to whatever environment we're in and is desperately trying to help you not expose yourself or make yourself into something so that you won't get hurt or damaged anymore. And then, of course, as it grows and that dynamic continues, it ends up being a source of pain rather than the healer or the fixer, you know, the alleviator of pain. That's why, you know, ego defenses they're necessary, but if we don't get infused with or attached or connected with something bigger, more wholesome, more real, then it just sort of runs its course and starts to break down after a while because it's not sustainable. And so anyway, basically what we're doing with psychology, the whole field of psychology, spirituality, and School of Life is we're trying to wrestle with these things so that we can be successful according to the soul's like way that it might define success which would be to be more congruent, more whole, more integrated, more truly your essence. And so then that starts to break down when you have people who maybe got into the wrong career. And I see people like that all the time. They're not developed enough to know what they want or what they really want to give themselves to. So they use these ways to decide. So someone who might really be a writer or I don't know, or an artist or something, doesn't see in the culture where those people can make it, you know? And so then they're like, okay, I got to pick something here that
It doesn't kill me.
that's not going to kill me. Yeah, so might go into engineering or finance or library science or, you know, something that, because all librarians are super rich. But they might go into something because they have an aptitude for it, but they don't know themselves well enough to know that if they dedicate their whole life to that, then it's going to leave a lot of themselves behind, or it's going to drive them crazy or whatever. So then you maybe make a mistake and you spend 4 years, 6 years, 8 years perhaps studying to get the credentials, then you go into the field and it chews you up and spits you out. That didn't take me very long to figure out at all. I picked my college degree so that I wouldn't have to work evenings or weekends or summers. So I decided to be a teacher. And I didn't really like teenagers, so I thought I would go into elementary education. And I sailed through college, probably got all A, summa magna cum laude, or summa whatever, I think I graduated. But then my first job, I just, oh my God, I hate this, I hate this. And it was even in a non-traditional work environment, but it required me to be super organized and high energy and very creative and very practical and very all kinds of things that I just am not. And I think I only had 12 kids in my class, but I worked part-time, and it just about killed me. So it was definitely the wrong profession. And there are other examples too. And I'm thinking of one, but I don't exactly have permission, but I think that he would tell his story anyway. So I'm talking about our son Justin. When he was in high school, we were trying to figure out, and I was thinking for sure, he's an unconventional kid. What would be a good path for him, to go forward? And one of the things that I thought he's super good at is people. Like, he really has this knack for people. So I thought, well, maybe he would go into psychology or something. But what he really, really, really loved was music, is music. And so after we got a private teacher for him, the teacher then started to tell us, he's really good. And he could make it. Like, he could make it as a performer. And he probably could get a full ride scholarship. He's so good. So we sat and thought about it for a while, and what they say about musicians, that just didn't look good. The future didn't look good. But then we just thought, well, what the heck? Go with who you are, because you can always work at Target. And this is the critical period of time when you need to be formed by the thing. So he got a tuition scholarship. He majored in performance, and then when he graduated, he started to see how daunting it was to be a professional performer in a culture where in real life musicians is shrinking, especially the kind of music that he loved. Orchestras are shrinking, and funding is disappearing, and competition is huge. And so, well, I guess I really loved marching band, so maybe I could be a teacher. So then he went to graduate school, got his degree in music education, and got a job. Hated it. And so it became kind of a crisis for him in terms of, I screwed up. Like, this is stupid. What did I do? What a waste. Either the temptation would be, I'm a sucky teacher. I'm just a bad person. So I should just get better at doing that, which of course he could have. Double down. Yeah. Or say, well, screw this. I'm going to, whatever. So it becomes a crisis in certain periods of your life, trying to figure out what to do. So he did what was in front of him and started working at Office Depot and kind of moving up there. But of course, it shamed him every day. I'm a musician, but da-da. And then of course his spirituality got in there too, and was in a system where it said, well, your idol was music, and so you have to
Let us all grieve that for just a second.
Yeah, let's all just go, oh, fuck, So the thing that's supposed to help you know who you are and be consistent with who you are is actually telling you something different, because they're disconnected from the purpose of their being, right? And so the crisis gets bigger. Anyway, so long story, but he comes here. So the job that he got enabled him to move here and do something that he actually likes to do. It's maybe not what he is ultimately born to do, but he loves to do it. And then he just fell into opportunities to perform that he loves to do. So now he has the opportunity to redefine what success means. So was he a failure or was he a success? You know, if what was moving him was just do what you can to get some money in, and then actually I kind of like this, and actually now I can do this part and kind of move up the ranks, and then that enables me to find a job where I ultimately belong, where I want to live in the nation, you know what I'm saying? Listening to those kinds of pulls of the heart, and then puts him in a position to meet someone who's connected to the orchestra, who then invites him to perform, and then he gets all kinds of opportunities to perform and to express what he loves to do. So this kind of pieced together life at this phase where he's at looks like success to me. But unless you get that the soul defines success differently than the culture defines success, then you're going to suffer. Okay? That's just one example. So we also have something called power, which we all have to have some relationship with. Okay, sorry, I just lost track of time there. And we could spend the rest of the day talking about how power operates in our culture versus how the soul relates to power. And it's like two different things, almost. Because power, in and of itself, is just the ability to get something done. It's the juice that helps you get something done, basically. And so, if what you're trying to get done is settle into who you really are and express that and grow in your own soul's substance, then power starts to look different. It starts to look more like experience and authority.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, vulnerability.
Unflappability.
Groundedness, or like,
Grounded in yourself, that you're not.
yeah, groundedness or gravitas, you know. And these things don't work over here in the culture, because power has to do with scarcity, has to do with grabbing resources that we believe are scarce. So you have to get more of them than other people, right? So power looks like dominance, competition, accumulation. All these are really big words. Ranking. So if there's only so much power, and power is defined by position, then you got to find your place in the pecking order. And if you need to get up, then somebody else has to be replaced, right? So it's all built on a model of scarcity and competition. And whereas here, I think there's something about power we don't really understand, but if it's groundedness, and if it's a sense of wholeness, if it's a sense of we are connected to something big, something with abundance, then we can use our power in a way that creates more power for everyone. And
Something to be given away,
yeah,
as opposed to something to be grabbed.
yeah, yeah. So then we start helping others with less power have more power, and then we find out everybody has more power, you know?
And no one has less power.
And no one has less power.
I always say power is not like pie.
Yeah, it's not like pie. In fact, none of these things are. When you think about some of the other values of the soul, like love, love is the big one and the most easily illustrated, because it's really a myth that there's only so much love to go around. But most of us grew up in systems where that was believed. There's only so much available. So we better try to get as much as we can and do whatever we have to do to get it. So perform or act out or be invisible or, there's only so many ways you can try to get more love. And we never notice that we're actually not getting more, because it wasn't circulating in the system anyway. But not because it was scarce. It was because everybody was operating on this idea that, there's not enough to go around. So you better conserve it. Better not give it away. You better not let yourself be vulnerable to it, because then that just leads you to, you get where I'm going. So, so the soul then has a different relationship with all of these things that are real and true, but can operate so differently, depending on where you're oriented. Can you think of, well, abundance would be one of them.
Or infinite as opposed to limited, or
Yeah. So the supply or whatever.
Yeah.
So this would be abundance, this would be scarcity. And anytime there's not enough of something, then, you better get what you can, or else figure out a way to live without it.
I
Yeah.
just want to throw out maybe a question for further discussion at another time, but the phrase changing culture or culture changers kind of is banging around in my mind. And instead of, my tendency is to vilify existing culture and then get counterculture. It's probably that other energy, like we talked about. But the importance as a values, I guess I'm failing at words to articulate how the soul values culture and changing culture and developing or evolving
Yeah,
culture and empowering shifts in culture.
Yeah.
Because that's where, God damn, the work is,
Mhm,
where
yeah.
the rubber meets the road, instead of just doing this escapism to my happy culture in the soul space. It's this is where the work is in shifting a culture, and that is a different conversation for some point.
Well, I think if you think about one of the things that the soul is doing, is evolving, growing, expanding. So the whole nature of evolution is moving from simple to a little more complex or nuanced, and it's and it's in a trajectory of improvement, supposedly. That's kind of the nature of the idea of evolution. I'm not talking about, evolution, but it kind of informs the concept. So if you think about the soul is always in a growth pattern and always inviting toward growth and, I guess, betterment or fulfillment, maybe more, then that works with individuals, but individuals are in groups of people. And so the history of humanity is this kind of back and forth struggle with our internal struggles, even with our own soul and our culture. So if you think about humanity collectively, is maybe its mandate is to be more in line with wholesome, life-affirming values. And the more we can practice that, the better for everyone. And then it changes society and the world, but it also changes the self. It's just the same kind of process on a larger scale. So the issue with cultures evolving and shifting is that it bumps into the tolerance level. So, and it reflects also what's going on inside of us. So let me see if I can talk about this without sounding stupid. So just like inside of us, when our soul is inviting us into something bigger and more wholesome, we think, when we're sitting here thinking about it, we're like, yeah, sign me up. But when the rubber meets the road here and you realize this job is killing me, or this relationship is sick, or this me being in control of everything, my need to make sure I'm safe by controlling everything in my life. And the soul is asking you to be more okay with vulnerability and not knowing, and we're locked down on trying to understand things and control things, then we are in turmoil. And so then we're pitting ourselves against, so to answer the call of the soul means deconstruction happens in the ego. And when I guarantee you that when the ego feels itself being deconstructed, it feels like it's dying. It starts yelling, it starts crying, it starts being in crisis because it doesn't know anything bigger. And so when you feel like you're losing everything that you know, that feels like death. That feels very, very threatening. And unless you have some awareness that there might be something bigger going on here, and that's just your ego, or there's a part of you that knows better, that's not damaged, that's there to bring you into wisdom, that's there to bring you all the stuff that you need. If you don't know that, then you feel like you're dying. So what do you do when you're dying? You scramble, you grab, you do all the things you were taught to do. And so that's how we tie ourselves up in knots, and we ultimately collapse till we find different ways or different things. Same with cultures. So as cultures try to move toward values that are maybe more inclusive, more valuing of individuals, less hierarchical and more leveled, and that an increase in our sense of connectedness and responsibility to each other, that has an effect on decisions that we make and how we relate to other cultures of the world. And sometimes those other cultures are not considering that we're more evolved, So take, for example, America and the West. So we have the European Union and America, who, it could be argued, have been more evolved societally in the last several decades than other. Let's take Russia, for example. Okay, let's just do this. So Russia has had this history that I don't understand very fully all along, but the destruction of the Soviet Union, like the deconstruction of the Soviet Union, we all thought was this great opportunity for it to become more egalitarian, more holistic, more humanitarian, all of these things. And it probably was trying to head that way. But the crisis that happened reignited all of these forces and these powerful people who just took advantage. And so they started to use their smarts in order to feather their own nests and gather as much power and money and resources as they could. And now we have a country that there's a huge split between the oligarch class and the peasant class. And it's just clear to us from the outside that they didn't weather their crisis well. And so that's them. That's probably a clearer. But for us, we're in a very similar crisis right now in terms of what do we really value and why. And so when we're talking about power being authority and vulnerability and congruence, in the last administration, we heard a lot about we don't torture, that's not who we are. We're hearing a lot more value language, trying to be as a culture better, I guess. And then whether it succeeded or not is not the point, but now we're in a season where there's a backlash. So all of those so-called values of inclusiveness and equality that we're striving for, I guess, now are threats. So if we include everybody, then we're wrecking our society. If we let those rapists and murderers across the border, then they're only going to hurt us. And if we let people destroy the concept of marriage, then we'll be worse off, So it really is a clash of values on a grand scale. And we could decide what are the right values and what are the wrong values, but that would just kind of miss the dynamic of this back and forth, this kind of ebb and flow, and this surge toward certain things, and then this reaction against them, and then and whole decades of, or even hundreds of years of a battle between these kinds of things. So think about the Grecian and the Roman Empire, and how that was, the golden age. And then along came another culture, the barbarians, wherever they are, the Huns and the Western Europeans, who took advantage of that sort of relaxed, and then went into the Dark Ages for how many years, 300 years, or how many hundreds of years that was. And then we started coming back in the Middle Ages, and then the Renaissance, and then the Industrial Revolution. So what you're talking about there in terms of culture change is, on the surface, we want to work hard to change the culture so everyone does better, right? And that means that we jump into the fight and we do it at this level. But we need to understand that it's not that easy to do, even though it feels, and doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. But if we keep in mind that just like our own development has these stops and starts, and progress and sabotage and those kinds of things, that's kind of what humanity does. We try to be good, but we don't do it very often. But so all of that I just think is fascinating. I just love to think about all of that. But back to what we're about here.
And even microcultures, like this room is a safe, soul valuing culture. And just, so there's so many different levels of culture, obviously, but you can have a family culture, you can have a school culture, you can have neighborhood culture, all of those little micro points of entry that can impact a larger American culture or a world culture, whatever, global culture, whatever it is. But I feel encouraged at times.
Yeah.
When I see some of this culture war that is in the news, etc., and then I hear stories of people doing good work and not engaging in the blah, 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 fight language, but just kind of hunkering down and doing their quiet work. And I think that is deeply encouraging to me, one, on my own soul level, and how my soul has invited me to find people who are doing good work, and how that empowers my own journey to do good work.
Yeah. I think you really have a good handle on the struggle, and on how hopeless it all can feel on the one hand, and how hopeful it can feel on the other hand. I just want to put in a good word for the refuge, because I think it's a really good example of trying to organize a group of people, trying to collect a group of people that lives by a different set of values, and doesn't always get as sidetracked or compromised by these other values as other faith groups can get, So when I think about how power is handled and given away, and other people are empowered to do things that in other systems would just belong to the few, and those they would be professionals, you know, and then how those people then can step into and express more who they are and give away more of their stuff. Like it's a little piece of illustration of how you could live by different values. But to do that, you give up some things.
Money, power.
Money, power, status, coolness, you know.
Or the certitude,
Yeah,
because it's just effing messy.
yeah,
Yeah, it's so like,
yeah. Control, efficiency.
I do think the thing that, in terms of recognizing where that soul is and the mystery of it and trying to go towards that is something that keeps at least the sense of there's so many possibilities. Life is just out there. And I saw something the other day. It was a woman who'd started yoga in her 90s.
wow.
107.
Oh my goodness.
And they had this interview with her. And there's joy in her face. And she actually was laughing. She says, she's in England, I guess, and she had to go for her driver's lesson or test first time in 80 years. She said, "I'm sure, I haven't been assessed for 80 years." But it was that, I don't care. Whatever will happen, or whatever's going on. And I'm living my life on this every moment basis. And to me, then that gives all the hope in the world.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think she's too worried about, oh, she might be, or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Were you going to say something, Ted?
Oh no.
Oh, you're just scratching your head?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Just.
Yeah, so it's just so complex, and I think when we're sitting here starry-eyed thinking, oh yeah, I want all the holistic values, you know, and then we have to go, well, no one's going to fund that, you know, or I'm going to look stupid, you know, if I decide I'm not going to conform to standards of beauty, and I'm just going to be naturally who I am. You know.
Well, and there's definitely examples. I mean, I was thinking while we were doing this too about like somebody like Van Gogh, who truly was the back of the class in his drawing class with Toulouse-Lautrec, Toulouse-Lautrec, and they thought he was awful.
Yeah.
And whatever he did, and he kept listening, and he kept doing, and he was never. I mean, he had to be agonizing all through his life, and never got any recognition for himself of that, of what he had done, which is break through a culture of some kinds of different paintings, as many of them did.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And you know, it doesn't guarantee that it's going to be.
Yeah, you have to be prepared.
What is your total passion?
The cost of this might be letting go of all of this, and that feels really terrifying sometimes. But I think bring it back full circle then to sovereign. I think that's partly why we want to. Sovereign is the part of our actually accessible ego that we can begin to cultivate and listen to and nourish and participate with, because that's the part of us that keeps that connection to the soul alive and starts to inform us and keep us in a place, you know, where we're not losing our minds, or we're not, just helps remind us of some things that are true, that are beyond the rest of us to understand. So.
It makes me think too about, because when Mary shared before you said that, I was kind of looking around, and I don't know you, but you're wise, and I can tell. And you know, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing, soulful group of awesome people.
Yeah.
Like we're all trying to live this out, and how much we need each other in the process. Like it's just too lonely to make that shift without each other. And I was thinking how sovereign, there's a little piece like listening to that deeper thing of who you need to last, and like getting to that kind of, the older you get too, the more you're like, I don't have time for that shit anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seriously, it's just too. So like, how to get your people
Yeah.
who keep you on this path of wholeness and healing, and getting like, breaking down all the things that are keeping our soul stifled, and how like that's the piece why we have to be together and share, and the wisdom, and Sovereign knows that kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it just made me think how grateful I am. That's me.
Yeah. I'm really grateful too for y'all. So I'm just going to end the recording.